Greetings. My name is Louise Dente, and I welcome you to yet another edition of Cultural Caravan. On this edition is a special as we're joined by the son of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, Dr. Julius Garvey. Welcome to Cultural Caravan, Dr. Garvey.
Thank you, Louise. It's my pleasure to be with you.
Yes, and it's just so great. I know we had the pleasure of interviewing you with Dr. William Sorrell a few years ago, and at that time we spoke about your father and his dedication and his legacy, which still lives on. But for those who are not familiar with who your father was and his contributions, just give us a brief overview of who was your dad, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey.
He was a major Pan-Africanist of the first half of the 20th century. And from my perspective, at any rate, I think he laid the foundation for Pan-Africanism to come after him, because I think he defined it based on, you might say, African cultural roots, which I think previously and even subsequently, many Pan-Africanists, they have, you might say, attempted to redesign Eurocentrism from an Afrocentric perspective, which I think doesn't work. Whereas I think my father was primarily African in terms of his Pan-Africanism, meaning that he was reconstructing African civilization, both from a Kemetic and a Nubian perspective, going all the way back in history. So, he laid that foundation by developing an organization called the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, which he created in 1914 in Jamaica, and then came to the United States in 1916 and ultimately stayed here. He was influenced by Booker T. Washington, and the reason for him coming to the U.S. was really to look at Tuskegee Institute and to model it, because he thought that was the way for African people worldwide to become involved in the industrialization process, because from about that period of 1910, industrialization had been increasing leaps and bounds. So people were moving from an agricultural society to an industrial society. So he saw that as the way for us as an African people who had been recently enslaved, if you will, still colonized, but we needed to move towards nationhood, and we needed to move towards an industrial economic base and commercial base. So that was the nature of his organization. He came here in 1916 with the intention of going back to Jamaica with those plans for a Jamaican, if you will, Tuskegee, but then got trapped, if you will, in the United States, the problems that existed here as he traveled throughout the country. He traveled throughout 38 states in 1 year, and then saw the necessity of him having to stay here to deal with the problems here as well as internationally. So the base then became Harlem, which was the capital of Black America at that time. And in some sense, the rest is history, meaning that the organization grew by leaps and bounds. It had over 1,000 branches in 40 different countries with membership of over 6 million people. Mm-hmm. And over time, then, the organization, you might say, and the Pan-African spirit then was transferred, if you will, to Africa via people like Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, who were his disciples, as well as people such as Malcolm X. So he had a profound influence throughout the 20th century, and his influence continues until now.
One of the things we had begun to talk about is, and people don't focus, is the woman, your mom, who obviously just the fact that she kept things going. Tell us a bit about your mother and you know, particularly after your dad had to leave. What was the impact? What happened?
My mother was of extreme importance to him and to the movement because she came out of, you might say, Jamaican middle class or upper middle class status, and she had a significant education for a woman. She was legally trained in Jamaica. So when she joined the UNIA in New York, she brought that legal training to the organization and was able to set up the organizational structure within the office, so to speak, and she took that over. She also became editor of the women's page of the Negro World, which was the paper that was started in 1919. So she wrote that, and she was the intellectual equal of my dad in terms of her background and her own intelligence. So, you know, the significant discussions in terms of going forward and strategies, etc. And then, if you recall, you know, my father was convicted of false charges by J. Edgar Hoover, so that he ended up being imprisoned in 1925. So my mother, you know, took the reins of the organization to a large extent, and at that time also she collected a number of his speeches and published the Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, volumes 1 and 2, which were very, very significant at that time and subsequently in terms of recording his message. And then my dad was deported from the United States. The sentence was commuted in 1927 by Calvin Coolidge, and he was deported back to Jamaica. Of course, my mother went with him, and he established the organization there, among other things. Now, both myself and my brother were born in Jamaica. I have an older brother, Marcus Jr., who was just recently passed in December. So then she had the added burden, if you will, of raising a family, 2 kids. We were 3 years apart. And, you know, my father, you know, was involved in politics in Jamaica, as well as the whole anti-colonial movement at that time, and created the first political party there, as well as the first labor union there, and inspired a lot of the labor movements around the Caribbean, so that, you know, every Caribbean leader at that time and subsequently was influenced by Marcus Garvey. But the power structure, the colonial power structure, the British, the French, and of course the apartheid system here in the United States was against him. They were tampering with the mail, etc., and preventing exchange of information as well as monies, so that it was difficult for him to maintain an international organization from Jamaica. So he felt that he had to go to Britain because they would not be able to tamper with the mail. There was a different system. It was not a colonial system. So he went to England in 1935 along with my mother and us, my brother and myself. So we spent 2+ years in England, but my brother developed arthritis in his knee from the damp climate, and we were advised by doctors to go back to Jamaica. So my mother opted for that, although my father didn't want it. He wanted to maintain the family intact, etc., etc. So we came back to Jamaica in 1938, and subsequently, of course, you know, she raised us from then, but subsequently my dad died in 1940. So again, you know, everything fell on her in terms of a single parent raising 2 boys, and you know, she did an excellent job in terms of, she never remarried. She was true to the legacy, meaning ideologically she was his compatriot, and you know, she maintained his image to us and raised us as his children, meaning that she imparted to us his ideology, etc., etc. So we grew up as Africans, not necessarily so much as Jamaicans, but as Africans, you know, born in Jamaica but living in England and Jamaica, and I've lived in Canada and in the United States. So, but the fact of my being an African person was imparted to me by my mother, and I know my brother felt the same way. So that whole concept of Pan-Africanism was something that also pervaded the family. And she was the backbone of the family because she had property of her own and so on. So even when we were cut off from England, because the Second World War started in 1940, and there was a lot of problems even before then in terms of moving back and forth. So because she had independent resources of her own, we were able to live and develop, adequately, so to speak, even after his death in 1940, and the Second World War until 1945. So our growth and development was not hindered, by the fact that we were separated from our father, and then he died at an early age. So she did a wonderful job in raising both of us. And then she also carried on with the organization in terms of the branch in Jamaica, and in terms of so many young people coming to find out, well, what was it like, from the inside, so to speak. And there were many, many young people, people like Tony Martin and Rupert Lewis and so on, who came to find out from her, the inner workings of the organization and the inner workings of my father's mind, etc., etc.
How was it growing up, Garvey? Meaning you definitely had the foundation that your mom set. Despite that, I'm sure, what were some of the challenges, particularly dealing with the name Garvey, the legacy Garvey of your dad, as well as just trying to carve out your own identities as men?
Yeah, well, I don't think there were any challenges per se that, in terms of the name Garvey or being Garvey. But the second part of your question really is one of individual identity. It's all well and good to be the son of Marcus Garvey, but you have to be your own person. So that's more or less a lifelong process as you grow and you learn and you develop. And my own personal inclination was towards medicine, so that when I left high school, I went to college in Canada at McGill University in Montreal, and then proceeded then to medicine, because that was my liking. And subsequently then came to the United States, where I interned and did a residency in surgery, and then subspecialized in cardiothoracic and vascular surgery, and 40 or 50 years of practice, so to speak. So that was my route, but I've always been African, and I've always been Pan-African in terms of my ideology, and then I've also been Garvey in terms of the son of Marcus Garvey. So that I've been involved in community activities, whether it's on a medical basis or simply a political or economic basis, in terms of being involved in different enterprises, etc., or going to different places, whether it's in the Caribbean or Africa, in terms of healthcare activities that I've been involved in, or again, the different conferences and speeches. I guess I've done about 1,000 or more, different speeches relative to, my father and his mission and his organization and what he proposed and what's central to his understanding or his concepts of Pan-Africanism and so on. And I've done this all over the world. I've been to more than 30 different countries in Africa, all over the West Indies, and of course the US and Canada and Central America, etc. So it's been a very active life, a very interesting life, and as you say, within that you have to find yourself and not allow circumstances to dictate who you are.
Briefly, I do want to ask about your brother. I know that we lost your brother about a month ago, the late Marcus Garvey Jr.
Yes.
And briefly tell us a little bit about him in terms of what he did, because I think that people kind of didn't have an opportunity to know him as much or as recently.
Yes, well, he was my older brother, 3 years older, and he is named after my dad. He's Marcus Garvey Jr. And, as we were just talking about previously, a lot of the expectations, I think, fell on him because of his being named Junior, for one thing, and, of course, being Marcus Garvey's son. So I think there was more of an expectation from him that you're going to grow up to be like your father. So I think I got off a little bit easy being younger brother. And again, like I said, 3 years younger. So, he was more in the spotlight from that perspective. Now, he ended up choosing, science. He was a physicist and mathematician, electrical engineer, actually, as a profession, and then a teacher in those areas, maths, physics. But he also was involved in politics, and there was a period where he was president general of my dad's organization, the UNIA and ACL, and that was the late 1990s until about 2002. He began to develop the early stages of dementia. Unfortunately, I mean, he was a brilliant person, intellectually, and but of course, we still don't know why some people get dementia, etc., and some don't. But so that that aspect of his involvement and dealing with the legacy of my father was cut short because of that. But he spent about 10 years, I think, as a head of as I said, President General of the UNI and ACL. And he developed it, brought it along, and did very well in that sense.
There is a special project that you and a group of others are engaged in terms of taking, your father always wanted to go to Africa. He was there spiritually, never physically went, but this project now is actually symbolically taking his edifice to the continent, to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Tell us about this project, the Marcus Garvey Bronze Project, and what you...
Yes, what we're doing, and there's a group of us called the Marcus Garvey Bronze Coordinating Committee, made up of several interested organizations, Pan-African Technical Association, Michael Dawson with the Roots Organization, which is also the Whirlwind group, and the Marcus Garvey Development Institute. So we have formed this committee, really, and are raising a capital to develop a bronze bust, which is actually in the making. There's a very well-known sculptor out of Los Angeles, Nigel Binns, and he's working on this. He's done lots of different things over the past, and we've worked with him for the last 20 years or so. The purpose of the bust then is to place the bust within the halls of the African Union at its headquarters in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And we're planning to do this in August. So, it's fairly expensive. Total cost would probably be about $100,000 US, and associated with this also will be a trip. But the reason for us doing this really is, once again, to highlight the legacy of Marcus Garvey and to raise this whole awareness, because this is one of the problems that we find, that because we're not so much in control of our educational system, young people don't know from one generation to the next. It's only by more or less word of mouth, because it's not part of school curriculums. Even in a place like Jamaica, where he's the first national hero, it's not compulsory in terms of history to know your heroes. I mean, there are seven, I think there are seven national heroes in Jamaica, but you don't know about them, which is ridiculous. I mean, how do you have citizenship, and how do you have people understanding their role as citizens when they don't know their heroes, and they don't know how the country came about, how it was fought for, from Nani and Sam Sharp and everybody else. So we're trying to raise the awareness in the next generation, the current generation, so to speak, of what has gone before in terms of a Marcus Garvey, in terms of a Kwame Nkrumah, in terms of a Haile Selassie. So that part of our trip is going to be in Ethiopia to honor Haile Selassie. Part of it is going to be in Ghana to honor Kwame Nkrumah. So we're going to be there for about 2 weeks during August. And this is part of the legacy of Pan-Africanism. And we want, you might say, the African African Union to understand us in the diaspora as the sixth region. We are the sixth region. We are the diaspora. We were kidnapped, but we're real. We're here. We're Africans, and we have an ability then, to interact with the continent as its sixth region, to bring our resources, intellectual and physical, back to the continent.
So you said a lot in terms of the power of this project, the significance of actually not just symbolism, but also not only bringing back Garveyism to the continent, and making that connection between Ethiopia and Ghana, and making connection those two powerful leaders, Kwame Nkrumah and your dad, and how your dad influenced Kwame Nkrumah and Jomo Kenyatta and lots of others to really move forward for independence. So it's a very significant effort. And in my understanding, as you said, not only are you're having this bust of your father that's going to be put on permanently display in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, but also you're actually inviting others to be part of this opportunity. So for those out there that might be interested in going on this quest to make this significant, to be part of this very significant trip, which again, what were the dates you said from?
It's going to be from the 13th of August to the 24th of August. So that it's an 11-day, and it's about 5 days in Ethiopia, with the appropriate tourist stops, etc., and another 5 days in Ghana, again with the appropriate tourist stops. But we'll be interacting also with the government, and we'll also be having seminars, so that we'll be interacting on an intellectual level, a government level, and simply a visiting level. So we'll be paying our respects, so to speak, to those leaders, because both Emperor Haile Selassie and Kwame Nkrumah were founding members of the Organization of African Unity, which at this point in time has morphed into the African Union. So this is, a statement, if you will, of the continuity of our efforts to unify Africans worldwide, to have Pan-African unity, and to move towards a United States of Africa. This is foremost in my mind, and I think it needs to be foremost in all of our minds. As you know, things are happening in Africa in terms of its the African Free Trade region and so on and so forth. So there's movement towards that United States of Africa. We want to participate in that movement and say we are with you, and that's why we're going, and that's why we want as many people as possible to come with us and make this that kind of a trip to show our Pan-African spirit of unity with the motherland.
Well, it seems tremendous, and I think that particularly what you're doing, you representing your father and your mother's legacy, and I'm going to say that because a lot of times people have to see the connection, they see dad, but also Amy Jacques Garvey was part of that. They were a team, and that you're actually representing your parents, that legacy, and then going to these key African countries. So it's a powerful experience. And I know that there are people out there who are probably very excited right now with the opportunity to really make that connection and to really, in the spirit of Garveyism, you said there's going to be a unity concert. There's going to be a conference in both the University in Ghana as well as Addis Ababa. There's going to be the installation. So there's a lot that people can, find out about. And I know that there is we're going to provide the information for those who are interested, including the number. But, one of the things that you hope to come out of this experience, what is the outcome? So we are definitely want to make this powerful statement. And I know that Ghana particularly had the year of return in 2019, where they encouraged, and many Africans from the diaspora took that opportunity. They went to Ghana, and so where the motherland now is telling us to come, and this is something your father and your mother, advocated, in the 20s, that we needed to go back to Africa. So I just want to, in closing for this half, because we're going to do another half afterwards, for those on the other hand, on the other side of the tube, who are thinking about it, why is it so important today, right now in 2021, that people of African ancestry really seriously take advantage of the opportunity to repatriate?
Well, it's of extreme importance. I mean, I went back in the year of return 2019. We visited Ghana, we visited Senegal, and we visited South Africa with a group. And that was of extreme significance because we were commemorating 400 years of enslavement and sojourn, if you will, in the West under severe disadvantaged conditions. Now, I think if you look at Africa at the present time, you'll see that, everybody wants to be in Africa because Africa is the richest continent in the world. And you see the Europeans have been there, of course, since the 15th century, etc. And they've carved it up from the 19th century in terms of 1884, 1885, the Berlin Conference. And now you see that China is there, India is there, Japan is there, Israel is there, Lebanon is there. Everybody is there trying to extract resources from Africa. Now, if Africans don't go there or don't hold on to the resources, then there won't be any resources left for African people. So it is incumbent upon those of us in the diaspora to return either physically, and nobody is saying that all diaspora Africans have to go back. My father didn't say that. We're not saying that. But we have so many resources, intellectual as well as financial, as well as technical resources that we can utilize to help to develop Africa. Plus the fact, there's no reason why we should take our trips to Africa and to see what Ghana is like, or what South Africa is like, or what Ethiopia is like, instead of people going to Europe or to Latin America or what have you. For example, the HBCUs and so on, they should have connections with the African universities so that, African American students will be exchanged with African students over there, so that we have that kind of, bilateral student exchange with similar counterparts on the continent. So that's the kind of thing that we are trying to promote, is the spirit of African unity, the understanding of the commonality of our history, and the fact that the only way we're really going to survive and prosper is through our unity.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing this information with us, and particularly just doing what you're doing, continuing the legacy of your illustrious father and mother, who basically laid a foundation for all of us to follow. So again, we will share that information for those of us in the audience who may be interested. And we thank you for what you're doing and your contribution. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to continuing our conversation about the legacy of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey.
Thank you so much for having me, Louise. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.